After the humiliation of 1870, and with the Germans only 30 miles away in late August 1914, the elderly of Paris prepared themselves for the occupation of the French capital for the second time in their lives. So an Allied victory was crucial to stave off this fate, and this was to come in early September with the Battle of the Marne. This was the first great set battle of the war on the Western Front. It saw the French army, under the command of the inspirational General Joffre and supported by the British Expeditionary Force, drive the Germans back northwards towards the Belgian border. The crucial significance of this victory at the Battle of the Marne was that it confirmed that the Schlieffen Plan had failed. France had not been knocked out of the war, and Germany would have to fight a war on two fronts. By the end of the battle, the war had lasted just 6 weeks and had already claimed the lives of tens of thousands of young soldiers. After the Marne, each side turned their attention northwards to the race for the sea, a series of manoeuvres in which both sides tried to outflank each other. The objective was to control the strategically important Channel ports. Fighting grew steadily more intense as autumn arrived, culminating in the First Battle of Ypres in October and November. With the early enthusiasm and optimism of August dissipating, the British Expeditionary Force, already reduced by heavy casualties, endured even more losses. However, they held firm at Ypres, and backed by 20,000 newly arrived Indian soldiers, successfully defended the town. This secured the Channel ports, allowing Britain to reinforce its forces and not give up control of the Channel to the Kaiser's navy. After Ypres, as autumn turned to winter, soldiers on both sides dug a line of trenches that soon were to stretch 300 miles across Western Europe, from the English Channel to the border of Switzerland. Both sides settled down to a war of attrition in which the artillery and the machine gun, the rain and the mud, the trenches and the barbed wire defined the nature of the miserable war that followed. In this new hell, they learnt to live with the terrible monotony of mud, rats, lice, and the constant threat of sniper fire. The trenches of the First World War were to leave a terrible, indelible mark on the psyche of the 20th century, with them coming to symbolize the terrible futility and horror of modern industrial wars. There they followed orders issued by generals who remained convinced the victory would only come from massed frontal infantry charges across no man's land. Only then, they believed, could there be a decisive breakthrough. This central tactical battle plan dictated operations on both sides of the Western Front until 1918, with the most staggering loss of life. So the war that many had optimistically predicted would be over by Christmas was only just beginning. By the end of 1914, nearly 2 million men on the Western Front alone had been killed, wounded, or registered as missing. Meanwhile, in Britain, Parliament passed DORA, the Defence of the Realm Act. Its sweeping new powers curtailed civil liberties and enormously increased government authority. Newspapers were censored, alcohol sales were restricted, and people could be prosecuted for careless talk that might aid the enemy. Control over the railways, industry, and food supply marked the beginning of a managed war economy, signalling a new relationship between the state and the citizen that really was to last the whole century. One of the major reasons for the failure of the German attack in the West was the early success, especially in East Prussia, of the Russian army in the east. This had persuaded the German High Command not only to strengthen its force there, but to recall General Paul von Hindenburg from retirement. Hindenburg was to play a central role not only in the war, but also in the peace that followed. He was to bring with him General Ludendorff as his chief of staff, fresh from his success as the mastermind behind the capture of Liège in Belgium. They together orchestrated a stunning victory at the Battle of Tannenberg, and a little later at the First Battle of the Masurian Lakes in early September, with Russia ruined by the losses it suffered in the two battles. These amounted to around 160 to 175,000 killed and wounded, plus another 135 soldiers who were marched off into captivity. These sensational victories made Hindenburg and Ludendorff national heroes in Germany. Further to the south, at the same time, the Austro-Hungarians were driving into Serbia, with Belgrade falling in December. Well over 250,000 people were to die in this campaign alone. Battle was also engaged at sea, with the German Navy keen to challenge British naval supremacy. The main tactic employed early in the war was the use of mines and submarines to attack British shipping and especially British merchant shipping in an effort to starve Britain out of the war. In September 1914, the cruiser HMS Pathfinder became the first ship ever sunk by a torpedo fired from a submarine when it was hit off the east coast of Scotland. Further from home, the two navies chased each other around Cape Horn into the South Atlantic before meeting at the Battle of the Falkland Islands. An emphatic British victory led to the sinking of the German fleet, with the loss of over 1,800 German lives. By the end of 1914, British naval superiority had been reasserted, for the time being. As the year drew to a close, the war that had begun as a regional conflict in the Balkans had spread across the world. In the Far East, Japan had already entered the war on the Allied side, and in southern and East Africa, as well as in the South Atlantic, the two feuding alliances fought each other, with colonial territories and peoples dragged into a European war far from Europe. More important to the central balance of power, however, was the entry into the war at the end of October 1914 of the Ottoman Empire on the side of the Central Powers. This opened up the possibility of threatening British interests in Egypt and the Suez Canal, while also cutting Russia off from its allies by closing the Dardanelles. For Britain and France, this highlighted the importance of defending vital imperial routes and preparing for campaigns in the Middle East and the Dardanelles. Britain, in retaliation, annexed Egypt and Turkish Cyprus and moved to defend the Suez Canal, a vital link with its empire in India, its possessions in the Far East, and, of ever-increasing importance, its oil supply. By December 1914, both sides on the Western Front were exhausted after months of heavy fighting that had started at the Marne in August and lasted until the end of November at the First Battle of Ypres. Morale was low on both sides as soldiers contemplated their first wartime Christmas away from home. On Christmas Eve, German soldiers in some sectors decorated their trenches with candles and small trees and began singing carols such as Still Nacht, Silent Night. British troops responded with their own renditions, and soon a mingle of their shared voices echoed across no man's land. By Christmas morning, soldiers on both sides, in scattered sections along the front, began cautiously climbing out of their trenches. They exchanged greetings, shook hands, and swapped small gifts, such as tobacco and chocolate. The truce was never formally organized, although it spread spontaneously, predominantly in the Ypres salient. But commanders on both sides quickly ordered an end to the fraternization, worried that it would undermine discipline. By Boxing Day, most fighting had resumed, and the war returned to its brutal pattern. The brief truce of Christmas 1914 showed a desire for peace by many of the young men sent to fight, but it was fleeting. Europe was locked in a conflict that would define the century. The first year of the war had ended, but worse was to come in 1915.